comes a rain, with my anger comes a tide of emotion, killing joy, cutting steel across your eyes. Are you dead or
Hi, this is Brendan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock Blog, and I'm here with Jeremy Bai for another episode of the Righteous Blood podcast. And tonight we're going to be talking about A Chinese Ghost Story. This is a movie starring Joey Wong and Leslie Chung and Wu Ma. It's directed by Jing Sui Tung, who directed movies like Swordsman 2 and Duel to the Death and a bunch of really great movies. And it's I think it was a Choi Hark production. It's a classic film. It's sort of a blend of horror, comedy, and romance. And it's about a lowly, sort of poor, somewhat gullible, I would say, scholar played by Leslie Chung, who falls in love with a ghost and finds out that she's being controlled by this ancient demonic tree that has her urn at the base of its roots, and he has to rescue her and bring her to a proper burial. And there's a crazy swordsman played by Wu Ma, and there's a lot that goes on that I'm just glossing over because this is like would you say this is a very gonzo movie, Jeremy? Is that an accurate label to affix to it?
Yeah, although it could have been more, but yeah.
I mean, I think it's a movie that starts as almost like a classic horror movie, and by the end they're like in hell fighting this, like, I don't know, some kind of unearthly magistrate from what I can tell. And I don't know, it's got a lot of beats, and it's peppered with all of these little comedic moments. So I don't know, I don't know if we've ever discussed this film. So what are your feelings about A Chinese Ghost Story?
I don't think we have discussed. In fact, I know we haven't discussed it. And before giving my take, I just want to say up front, before we get too far in and forget to mention it, we're kind of starting up a new sort of series of Righteous Blood podcasts because we're currently kind of exploring the possibility of doing some kind of expansion or extra content related to magic and the supernatural. And so that's kind of why we're doing this. And that's what we're going to be doing going forward. We're currently creating new content, play testing, and at the same time watching movies and doing the podcast. So as you listen along, you can kind of be a part of the creative process to some extent. So getting into the movie itself. Now, my initial summary is that I just really like it. It's a great movie. A lot of fun, a lot of cool action sequences, a lot of cool magic sequences. For people who are fans of my work, who are out there, one of the main characters that Brendan, you just mentioned, is a Taoist priest or of something along those lines. And he does some kind of cool magic-based wuxia attacks. And then, of course, you have demons and ghosts and different things like that. So definitely a lot more fantastic than the stuff that you and I have, for the most part, talked about on the Righteous Blood podcast, and definitely more fantastic than the stuff that we have in Righteous Blood, Ruthless Blades. So I really liked it. Now, here's something that I realized when I was watching this movie. I actually have, up until preparing for this podcast, I have actually never watched this entire movie. I didn't realize it.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's been years. I got into wuxia starting in the year 2000, and it was probably from around the year 2000 to roughly 2000 and maybe 6 or 7 that I was really heavily just watching everything. In recalling this movie, as I've thought back to it in recent years since we started doing Righteous Blood, Ruthless Blades, and I've really started thinking back to movies and whatnot, my impression of the movie was always that it ended with this gigantic tree tongue fight scene.
Yeah.
And then as I was watching it this time around, all of a sudden the movie kept going, and I was like, wait a second, I don't remember any of this stuff. And
that was your first time seeing the actual ending of the movie?
I don't know. Wow. I have no conscious memory of why that happened. Now, I have a couple of theories. One is it could be that I thought it was too weird, possibly. I don't recall that, though. So another possibility is that now if you have to put yourself in the mindset of the sort of early 2000s, This is back in the day when Netflix would send you a couple DVDs and then you would send them back in the mail. Blockbuster was still everywhere. We had local video DVD rental shops, and that was how I got most of my wuxia movies. I rented them from the either Blockbuster, or there was like this really niche video shop in the cool, quirky part of town that I would go, and they had a lot of stuff. It's also possible that I like rented it, and then the date came to turn it in, and I hadn't finished watching it, and I just turned it in. That's another possibility as well, very strong possibility, because I didn't have access to Amazon Prime back in those days.
Is it possible you saw a chopped up version of it too? Because there were a lot of the movies that we got back then too were like, sometimes they would just take chunks out if they thought Americans wouldn't understand it, or they'd be edited differently. They'd edit them down and.
Sure. I mean, I have no idea, but in the end, yeah, this is the first time I've actually seen the whole thing, and my impression of the movie was, I guess, better, because previously I remember watching it and I remember liking it. I remember the Dallas Priest guy. I remember the story between the main character, and even just that opening scene where he's kind of stumbling around with the little square scholar type backpack on and whatnot. I mean, that has stuck in my mind really strongly.
Well, that's iconic now. That's iconic.
Yeah,
that character.
Yeah, and the translation that I made my name on, or that started my career, or whatever you want to call it, I Shall Sail the Heavens. The main character of that story is a scholar. So when I started translating I Shall Sail the Heavens, I kept thinking back to Chinese Ghost Story, those scenes. So that's my take. I really liked it, and I think there's a ton to unpack in terms of the content of the movie as it relates to the stuff we talk about.
So let's start with that ending, because that's the first time you've seen it, and it sounds like it improved your impression of the movie. For me, I'm curious if you feel the same way. For me, I've always felt that's the thing that really, I love the movie all the way through, but that's what really carries it up into a higher level of, this is like a solid 5, or this is a solid 10, whatever your max rank is. That's what puts it up there. And I think the reason is because, and I want to address this in more detail later, but one of the main themes of the movie is this sort of blurring of the boundaries between the human realm and the ghostly realm, and all these various realms, really. And like, also in terms of genre, like, it's a blurring of comedy, horror, action. It even blurs, I feel it blurs like the line between being a viewer and being in the movie, because the way that it handles the music, they talk about diegenic music, that's like the music the characters are hearing versus the music the audience is hearing. And I feel like there's music in it that crosses the boundary from being diegetic to being the score, if that makes sense. Like, and it kind of, I don't know, just creates this sense that of the boundary being more flexible to me. And that ending is all about suddenly the permeability of the human realm and hell, or whatever that other underworld is supposed to be. That's sort of where all of that comes together, and it comes together in a very dreamlike way at that inn, where slowly you sort of realize that they're in this inn that is part of the evil that is chasing them, and there are hints to that sort of make you uneasy along the way, and it's just very well done. So I don't know if that's why, if you feel the same way, but for me, that was always my reaction to that last portion of it.
It could very well be, and yeah, I agree totally with what you're saying, and I think, I totally agree. I think that, well, I don't want to get to change the subject too quickly, but I want to mention also that I watched the whole thing in Cantonese, and then I was curious about some things, because being a language learner, I'm pretty well advanced in my Chinese, and I can understand most things fairly well, and so. Well, watching it in Cantonese, though, it was kind of frustrating, because I couldn't understand what they were saying, and I was curious about how accurate the subtitles were. So I then went back, and I didn't watch the whole thing in Mandarin, because I didn't have time, but I did watch some selected and important scenes in Mandarin. Then I read the original Pu Songling story that it's based on. So for anyone out there listening that isn't aware, it's loosely based on a story from the famous author Pu Songling. And I read that in Chinese. Now, to be clear, the original Chinese version of the story is a very ancient style of Chinese. So I actually didn't read the original. I read a translation into modern Chinese, basically, you could say.
Okay.
I think the best way to think about it would be like if you went back to read, I don't know, either Shakespeare or
Yeah.
Chaucer or something like that.
There are books like that. They're like modern English versions
Yeah.
of Hamlet and stuff that you can read.
And I kind of compared the two. There are some lines that are just exactly line for line, same in the old as the new,
Mm-hmm.
and then in some instances it kind of clarifies it. So anyway, the point is, I read the more modern version. And I was actually curious about how difficult it is to read the old Chinese version. So I asked my wife to read a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
She's native Chinese. She she's not like a scholar or something, but she is college educated, and she actually scored at the top of her class in Mandarin in college. So in China, they test you on Mandarin, both spoken, written, and reading and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so she scored at the top of her class in Mandarin. So it's not like she's, some villager that doesn't know how to read or something. She's definitely educated. And so I asked her to read it. So she sat down and read the first bit of the story, and her initial reaction was, "Oh yeah, I can read this." And then she kind of shooed me away, and I took our baby, she's 1 year old now, and let my wife read for a little bit. And she basically, her take was she could easily understand the story as long as she took her time reading very slowly to catch every single last character and word.
Okay.
So I think it's a little bit beyond my ability to read, at least not like just sit down and read it. The version I read, I could basically just sit down and read it and not have to look up every single archaic word. Okay, so going on with my story, I also read the John Minford translation into English as well. And so I got all of those different versions under my belt at this point. And so I couldn't help but compare all the different ones and the similarities and the differences. And I know you read it in English. My take was the movie is at most just barely inspired, or it's like inspired by the original story in terms of the names and like the very, very, very general concept. But beyond that, there's very little similarities.
Well, I think it's like usually the Pusong Ling stories, when they're made into movies, they take a lot of liberties, often because they're just so short, but also because they have to make a movie out of the thing. I feel like if you watch the movie and then you read the story, you can see where everything came from. Do you know what I mean? Like you can see, like the core concept is there, right? And the core set of relationships is kind of there, but and again, I'm going through English translation here, so I might not have a full illumination to all of the details, but like I think one change, if I understood the story correctly, is it doesn't seem like the demon is a tree demon in the translations that I read. There is a poplar tree that's significant, so I see how if there wasn't a tree demon, how they got one. They just kind of fold that together with the demon that's in. But and also the swordsman role, his role is a little different. You can see where they go, but you can sort of see how they would take that and say, well, we're going to turn this into a character, and so that's sort of what's interesting about the movie, because if it's in the expansion that they succeeded with the material, I guess. So
I totally agree. I don't think it's any diss to point out that they're different. I mean, if you made a movie that was exactly like the story, it would probably be pretty boring. Although that said, there are some very significant differences, such as he's married. The whole thing about daytime and nighttime doesn't really exist in the movie. She basically eventually just follows him home and then lives with him as a ghost, and then slowly turns into a human, and then his wife dies, and I'm getting into spoilers here, but she ends up marrying him, and then I liked that they ended up living happily ever after. That's actually probably the biggest difference, I think, between the movie and the book. But I mean, the movie wouldn't have had the impact that it did if they stuck so closely to the original.
I like those elements of the story because it's like a very domestic story. Like there is all this drama around the ghost and all this, and there is the thing with the magic bag. But ultimately, it's about this ghost that follows him home, and he becomes his servant, and then he marries her, and then they have kids and all this stuff. And I think in the format of the Pusong Ling stories that work, but I think, and maybe there's a way to do it in a movie where it would work too. But I feel like in a movie, I can see why they went the other direction. But I do like this. The one sort of thing I don't, it's not bad about the movie, but it's the thing that sort of as a viewer, it makes me long for a different ending. Is there isn't the happy? I mean, there's a happy ending, but it's not as happy as the book ending. You know, and
yeah, but I again, I think the impact is significantly, well, it's more impactful sort of in the movie. In the short story version, it's like I liked this, and I'm a sucker for happy endings. I mean, I like a good tragedy as well now and then, but I ultimately prefer to have happy endings. That's one of the reasons why I really hate it, and this happens all the time in movies, and you know, it is what it is. But I really hate it in movies where you get the happy ending, and then at the beginning of the sequel, like they take away the happy ending. Like in Bourne, it's like he gets the girl in the end, and she dies in the beginning of the next movie. Like happens all the time. Well, I don't like that.
So that's I like sad endings, but I agree with you 100% on that, because that just totally takes away what you got from the first movie. It's a real and it's so disrespectful to the character that they just dispatch in the first 2 seconds. You know, it's there's a lot with that I don't like. But yeah, the movie is a lot more. It's kind of one of these films where they want you to feel every emotion over the course of the evening. So they want you to laugh. They want you to be on your edge of your seat. They want you to cry. They want you to have all these things, and it does a surprisingly good job of weaving through all of those different things. I mean, a lot of the movies from this period in Hong Kong do that, but this is one of the ones that really stands out, where it's like, wow, I was just laughing at the courtroom scene, and now suddenly I'm whisked away to this battle, and then this, and it's one thing after another. And I think the scene that encapsulates it the most for me is the bath scene for some reason. That's like the scene where you kind of get, I feel like it's at the center of the movie, so you get, it's where you see the pivoting the most, but also in that scene, there's a whole lot of story development as everything is sort of, you know, as all these little comedy things are unfolding, you know?
And I think for the most part, this movie pulls it off really well in terms of the pacing and balancing that, because there's plenty of other movies where they try to put in some funny stuff and then some action and then some drama and some romance, and it doesn't quite pull off, and they don't quite pull it off, and it doesn't feel like the same movie in between the different parts. This one pretty much does, and I think that's one of the strongest elements of it.
Well, I think it's the way that they stylize everything, like the courtroom scene, which is like as wacky as hell. Like, you know, you have this like it looks like a sketch from it looks like something out of a sketch show. Do you know what I mean? It's like that kind of comedy. But there's this looming eeriness that they managed to continue to keep bringing up in that scene that like ties it to the rest of the movie. Do you know what I mean? And it allows the transition from that scene to the next one to kind of work. But yeah, I don't know. I really like how they go from beat to beat like that, and I like how they just keep blurring the boundaries between things throughout the movie. It just seems like it feels very cohesive as a result, which is kind of, you know, it's ironic considering that, you know, what I'm talking about is that it's all over the map, you know. So
yeah.
But and also another thing I like about this movie is the music. I really like the way that the music is used throughout the movie. Like they use that opening theme song kind of in like the daylight hours mostly, it seems, to kind of denote like there's like a little bit more buoyancy to it. And then they use that like ethereal ghostly music during the romantic stuff. And then they use that like long droning music when you're supposed to be afraid of something. Do you know what I mean? And it's sort of like it's simple, but it really kind of it's effective. And I think my only complaint about the film, and it's not really a complaint because it's sort of like growing up from that period, it's just something you get used to. But the one area that kind of falls short is some of the practical effects around those corpses that are in the house.
Right. Yeah.
But they have a charm of their own, so it works. But like it definitely, you know, if it's something that I would want to prepare a modern viewer for, because the rest of the movie looks so good, and that's the section where it's like you can sort of see the strings of the you know
it's
what
like
I mean?
Really like not particularly bad stop motion, but not really good stop motion either.
Yeah.
And you know what? Incidentally, okay, as is the case with virtually every one of these podcasts, for the most part, I watched this movie in chunks because I got kids and I'm busy, so I watched it 15-20 minutes here and there. What happened to those skeletons? Did they, like, I remember they got
killed by the sunlight.
By the sunlight.
Yeah, they got that's another scene where it kind of looks like Gremlins, like when he gets melted by the sunlight. It's like the same type of scene. I think he drops his inkstone into into the basement, and he goes there, and then they're trying to get him, and it's like a slapsticky thing where he accidentally knocks down the panel and the sunlight kills them. Which you know, but so I don't know. And then there's also the other swordsman who dies early in the movie too, which is obviously, I don't know if you would call him an addition or if it's just that they simply took the first swordsman in the original story and split him into two characters.
Right.
But this one is like, much more ferocious and merciless, and he's righteous, but maybe a little bit too righteous and hot tempered. But I like the way I connect him to the story is the magic bag in the story gets its power because that's where the swordsman put all the heads of the people that he cut off. And we see that character cutting off people's heads at the start of the movie. So I feel like there's like there's some kind of connection there between the two things. But, I think we might have lost Jeremy here.
You're kind of breaking up for me there.
I was just saying, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. You were talking about the bag getting its power from the heads in it.
And I was just saying the scene where that other swordsman is cutting off people's heads in the start of the movie kind of connects it nicely to that for me. You know what I mean? It's sort of like, maybe that's where they got that idea. That's like the backstory that they
that actually meshes quite well with our sort of like killing aura darkness mechanic. Not exactly, but it falls in line with that, and that mechanic comes a lot from the stuff I've translated, because I think it's a concept that I've seen a lot in the stuff I've translated, which is, killing people has ramifications, especially as the number of people you kill increases, it has increasing ramifications.
Well, I guess in a way you could say, like, for our purposes, the killing aura of darkness is almost like your bad karma, right? Like that's kind of it can sort of serve that function. So we might be able to play on that. Like if there's a monster that specifically goes after bad people, for example, that might be a lever that we could pull. And like you were saying, like the idea of this, just the fact that this guy was killing these people in this way, that it would imbue the item that he's putting the heads into with power over time.
Yeah.
Is an interesting way to make magic items.
So what I was thinking is there are a couple different things I wanted to bring up, and I'm thinking we can split the rest of the conversation, depending on how much time we have, into a couple different areas, and maybe we can save the game related stuff to the last, because I have a couple of things to bring up about that. But while we're still talking about purely the movie and the story, I wanted to bring up some language stuff, and I'm not going to bore everybody with all of my language pontification, but like I said, I watched it in Cantonese and Mandarin and read it in Chinese and English, so I did notice a lot of different things. And if I was gonna pick one thing that I didn't like, I'll put that in quotations, didn't like, it would definitely be the subtitles. And I'm not saying that I didn't like the subtitles. Now, we were talking about this before we hit the record button, and I guess there's at least two different versions, and there's one that you like better than the other. And I think the one I got, which is the one on Amazon Prime, is the one that you say is inferior.
So there's a bunch of different versions of this movie. Obviously, it's been around for a while, and so I think I have like 3 or 4 versions of this movie. But there's a DVD version that has subtitles that I really like. And there's the Blu-ray version, which I believe we watched on Amazon. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's the Blu-ray subtitles. And the thing I immediately noticed the first time I watched the Blu-ray was I wasn't laughing as much during the comedy scenes, and it was because of the subtitles. They just weren't as punchy. And so, like, the big scene where you notice that is a scene where he's got the goop on his face, and he's kind of saying, like, in the human world, I act like a ghost. In the ghost world, I act like a human. And he's got this identity crisis, and they really amp up the humor of that in the DVD thing. And I think the big punchline is like, this is no time for having an identity crisis or something like that. It just really works. I don't know if it's accurate, but I was busting out laughing when I first saw it. And in this one, it's still funny because Wu Ma's kind of being ridiculous, but the language around it isn't adding as much to the humor, I find.
Sure.
And so
I think humor is one area. I was just talking about this on another podcast recently, with a translator. And I think a lot of translators will agree that if you're trying to make the audience laugh, you need to veer away from the literal translation. That's especially true with Chinese, where there's a lot of wordplay and things like that. Like you can get so bogged down in trying to accurately convey what's happening in Chinese that it just is not funny in English.
Okay.
So I'd be curious to check out that other version to see what you're talking about. For me, like I mentioned before, I don't understand Cantonese, so it's even doubly hard for me because sometimes I'll be watching something in Mandarin and English, and then I'll be able to spot the differences, or I'll hear the humor just directly and laugh, and I couldn't do that here. One interesting thing I noticed was that the Mandarin version I watched, it was on YouTube, and it has Chinese subtitles, but the Chinese subtitles don't match. And I didn't 100% check, but I'm fairly certain that the Chinese subtitles are for the Cantonese version, not the Mandarin version.
Okay.
I did a spot check a couple places. I didn't look deeply into it. I didn't have the time, but I'm fairly certain that those Chinese subtitles work for the Cantonese. In Mandarin, they didn't update the subtitles. So in Mandarin, like if you're not looking very closely, if you speak Mandarin and you're not looking very closely, you might not even notice that they're not actually speaking Mandarin. I've noticed this with the dubbed versions of a lot of things. A lot of the movies, they do a really good job of matching the language to the movements and their facial expressions and their gestures and stuff. Of course, it's made easy in that for the most part they are speaking the same Chinese characters, just different pronunciation of those characters. That's not a blanket rule in every case, but apparently they did change quite a bit in the Mandarin, because I was watching it and like none of the subtitles, I shouldn't say none, but many of them are just different. And so that said, I didn't notice any major changes. Like it wasn't as though, like plot points were different because of changes in Mandarin. It just that they changed to make it fit, presumably, the acting of the actors. So I thought that was a pretty interesting thing. And then another thing I wanted to get into even more deeply, and let's say a little bit deep, not too deep, is how they chose to translate a lot of the Chinese terms. And me and you have gone over this in various forms a lot over the years, and also specifically as it relates to the expansion to Righteous Blood, Ruthless Blades that we're planning. And one thing that frustrates me is the complete lack of consistency in how a lot of these terms are translated, which leads to people who don't speak Chinese basically not being able to have any sort of standard to understand what they're talking about. Now, obviously, with the movies, you're watching it happen on the screen, so you get it. And whether they translate it as tree spirit or tree demon or tree whatever, you get the point. But in Chinese, there is a fair degree of consistency into what is a ghost or what is a demon, depending on how you want to translate it. So, and I'll give you an example. For the English translation of the short story, I think she refers to, I'm talking about the girl who's a ghost. She refers to the creature that is controlling her. The translator, John Minford, chose to translate it as an evil spirit. In Chinese, it's not spirit. And this is one thing that it just drives me crazy. And it especially drives me crazy that somebody that's as well regarded as John Minford doesn't seem to have any consistency in his own translation. He just picks what he thinks sounds cool based on the circumstances. But basically, in the Chinese short story, it's a demon or Yao that is the problem for her. That's what she's dealing with. And in the movie, it's the same. In the movie, the tree is a Yao, which is a demon, and the creature that she is being sent off to marry, which in the version I translated it, they call them like Lord of the Black Mountain or something. I forget what it was.
Lord of the Black Hill or Lord of the Black Mountain.
Something like that. He's also described as being Yao, which is a demon. And the girl is specifically called a ghost, the character Gui for ghost. And so anyway, we've gone back and forth about this a lot, but it really does frustrate me that the average English speaker has no way to really know what is being.
Let's go into that one, because so what I want to know is, are they both the same type of demon? Like when you say Yao, is that like spirited beast? Is that like that type of demon, like some kind of like is it like it says in the movie? She's like a tree that's cultivated over 1,000 years. Is that
Yeah,
what? And
basically.
and then what?
Yeah.
And then the Lord of Black Mountain. What kind of demon is he supposed to be? Is that
It
clear? Or is that
doesn't really say.
okay?
I'd have to go back and double check the Chinese subtitles because I was doing some of this really late at night when both kids had finally fallen asleep and I was like bleary eyed, but I was like I gotta check the Chinese on this. So some of it is kind of blurring a little bit. But yes, yeah, he was described as being Yao as well, which I was a little bit sort of confused by because they specifically say they're going to Difu, which is not the most common word for hell. The most common word for hell is Diyu.
Yeah.
But that's like the generic word for hell in Chinese. But also there's like a million words for hell in Chinese. For instance, in the short story in Chinese, she's constantly saying that she's constantly referring to the nine, oh man, the word is skipping me now. The 9 springs that are under the ground, which is one of the terms for the underworld or hell or something like that. So anyway, in the movie they say Difu, which is the underground mansion or palace or something like that, and it's basically the underworld or hell. So they
now,
definitely
is that different from DU, or is it just it's a synonym but it's a different word?
From what I've experienced, and I don't want to make blanket statements claiming to be a top expert in this subject or whatever. From what I've seen, it's just a synonym.
Okay.
And there are a lot of different synonyms. I've seen authors use the different terms like the yellow springs or whatever, just completely synonymously with each other. So I was a little sort of confused by that, but not really. That this guy who's described as being a Yao or a demon is residing in hell. Like, why is that? I think some of it is that the terms get thrown around a lot, whether you're talking about modern novels or whether you're talking about the ancient stuff. I feel like there's a lot, the authors, the writers, from what I've seen, don't seem to adhere to as much of a rigid set of like a canon, or if you might want to put it that way. For instance, in the short story version, there is mention when they are in the early part of the story, when they're the two characters, I think it is, are kind of like, trying to figure out what's going on in this temple that they're staying at. They frequently use the word that combines Yao, which is, I usually translate it as demon, and then Mo, which I usually translate as devil, but doesn't always have to be. They put them together into one word, which is Yao Mo. So what exactly they're referring to in that is never really defined in the story. Is it that they mean demons and devils? Is it that they just mean monsters? It could be that they're just talking about monsters. Except there's another word which is commonly used to mean monster, which is Yao Guai. That said, Yao Guai is also frequently lumped in with simply Yao. Now, I did a YouTube video on this that I was working on a collaboration video with another YouTuber about this subject, and I never managed to release the video because I recorded it like 2 weeks before my daughter was born, and then after that, my whole life like fell apart. Not like, I just mean like my wife couldn't help me edit videos, and we were all sleep deprived and stuff, so I never managed to get that video out. But I did a lot of research into the whole Yao and demon thing, and the conclusion is basically that for the most part, demons or Yao are kind of like you said, if you want to use the term spirited, not necessarily creatures. They could even be like a mountain or a rock or something, where over the years of their cultivation, however they go about practicing it, if it's a mountain, presumably the energy of the earth passing through it or something eventually lead to it developing some sort of internal core or something that causes it to rise to a higher level of consciousness. However, they have not yet reached, and perhaps cannot reach, the level of becoming an immortal or a xian. So the ultimate goal, whatever it is, if you're a human or if you're a demon or Yao, is to eventually reach the level of becoming an immortal. But for those things, creatures and items and objects that have not successfully become an immortal, they are demons or Yao, and they're usually animalistic and chaotic, and that's what my research indicated, and that's what I've also seen in the stuff that I've translated a lot, for example. And I Shall Sail the Heavens, one of the big plot points that goes through the whole series is that there's a lake that is essentially a demon, and it manifests as a little girl, but it's a lake, and this lake's dream is to eventually become a sea, and the main character says, I will help you to become a sea one day. And so that's a lake that became a demon and eventually wants to become a sea. So
it's one of the most intriguing monsters that I encounter in these kind of movies and these kind of stories. And I think part of it is because there's so much you can do with it. Like you'll read stories where like you said, there's like a rock that's spirited, and sometimes it has huge personality and like all kinds of features, and sometimes it's like it's spirited almost more like Herbie is. Like, I guess that's the closest you can compare it to in American and English movies is like Herbie or movie, like or Christine.
You mean Herbie the Love Bug?
Yeah, Herbie the Love Bug, or Christine, the evil version of Herbie, right? Like, that kind of thing. And what's interesting to me is that a lot of the different movies and stuff, they kind of span the spectrum with that, where some of them are like Herbie and some of them are like Christine. Do you know what I mean? It's not always like generally it seems like they're supposed to be bad, but like in this movie, like you have the ghost played by Joey Wong, who's a good ghost. She's doing evil, but it's against her will, right? And so, and that could have just as easily have been shifted onto the demonic tree instead of the ghost. They could have had the demonic tree be the sympathetic creature that's trying to become more like a human or something. Sort of like a white snake type figure. So I don't know, but I mean, we've kind of been going on this for a long time, but I do think that is, when I first saw this movie, I have to admit I had no idea what was going on half the time. Do you know what I mean? Like your very first encounter with this movie, and you know nothing about Chinese mythology, nothing about Chinese ghosts, nothing about tree demons aren't even like a concept that you've encountered. Like you're just like, what is that? You have no idea. It just is. It just all looks like it's off the wall. But it's also. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, to compound that is the fact that, especially in the movies, which we also talked about this before hitting the record button, but especially in the movies, the directors are free to, and they take advantage of their ability to do whatever they want to make it look cool and to make the story work. Right. So it's not, I don't know for sure if the tree demon as portrayed in the movie is also described in Pusong Wing or maybe the classic A Mountain and Seas or whatever. I really have no idea. Or maybe he just made it up. I mean, it's hard to say. That complicates it as well, because the movie makers are trying to make a cool story and use cool special effects that they think are gonna wow the audience, and not necessarily they're not setting out to be like, let's make a extremely accurate portrayal of Chinese mythology.
I think even in the stories it varies, because like you had mentioned that one of the things that's different in the movie is they're killed by sunlight, and in the story that's not mentioned. And I feel like that's a rule that in some of the Pusong Ling stories makes an appearance, that they like the daylight affects them in some way, but in some of them it doesn't. And it seems like it's very much dependent on the individual story. Like in this story, these are kind of like the rules that the ghosts abide by, and it's a little bit different in the next story, which really isn't that different from like if you're reading like Grimm's fairy tales or something. Like the rules are going to vary from account to account, right? So I think I think one of the things that can happen when you're trying to sort of emulate this stuff is you can get caught up in, there can't be deviation from the rules established by this one source, but when the sources themselves have all these different rules, you kind of you need to be able to emulate that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It would be like the example that jumps to mind, because this is so recent, is I feel like it would be like somebody in, let's see, this movie came out in the 80s, right?
Yeah,
so
87,
97. We're like 25 years removed. It would be like if in 25 years somebody came along and was like,
I have some bad news for you. It's way more than 25 years.
Was it 35? 87? What year is it right now?
Wait, let me see. 97, 2007, 2017, right? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, 40. Let's just say 40 years. Let's say in 40 years somebody came along and was like, I'm going to make a Fast and the Furious role-playing game, and we're going to be completely accurate to the Fast and the Furious franchise. Well, sorry to say, but you're going to have trouble doing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So same concept where we're working on this supernatural stuff, and we're trying to maintain as much accuracy to Chinese mythology and whatnot as we can. But as you mentioned, even in the stories themselves by the authors, there's a variety of ways that different things are portrayed. Speaking of which, maybe we can move more into the game side as well. I think that's something that's good to consider is, I mean, we have a lot of decisions to make, like, are we going to have our ghosts be like the ghosts from the movie? Or are we going to have them be like the ghosts from the story? We have quite a few decisions to make.
Okay, so here's my general thinking on number one. I think you always have to have the room to add your own flair and stamp and be creative with it, or it's kind of dull. Do you know what I mean? But like, I feel like Chinese Ghost Story is such an important movie that's like the baseline. That doesn't have to be the standard for all ghosts and all tree demons, but you have to be able to make an adventure based on a Chinese ghost story and have it run the way a Chinese. You know what I mean? Like that's sort of how I think about these things. Like,
yeah,
we could make 18 other ghosts, and that's fine, but so.
Yeah, I mean, I think virtually everybody who is even remotely into these movies and this genre has definitely heard of it. They might not have heard of some of the other more obscure ones. I mean, you and I or primarily you, because this is more your area of expertise, made a list of the supernatural movies that we are going to try to, take inspiration from and do podcasts about. And that's a really long list, many of which I think a lot of people probably have never even heard of. But this one they've definitely heard of.
And I think one of the movies on that list, as far as I know, I've only been able to see it in Mandarin with no English subtitles.
Wow.
The 1960s version of Painted Skin. I watched it because I wanted. It's a class, but like I have no idea what they're saying. But for the visuals alone, it was worth it. But yeah, I'm sorry. Go on. I interrupted you.
No, I just was saying that sounds interesting, and I look forward to seeing that. And going along with the game stuff, I mean, even if you just went with Chinese Ghost Story, you could probably, I mean, there's a wealth of stuff that you could tap into in terms of inspiration. That's not to mention all the other movies that we have. So I think and of course the written stuff as well. So
yeah, I
think the challenge for us on the game side is going to be keeping it simple and not going overboard in terms of trying to draw inspiration from too many things, at least as far as what directly relates to game mechanics and creatures and items and whatnot.
One thing that can really be beneficial is to have a general rule that's clearly stated to people, which is there's variety is sort of more the norm with these things. It's sort of like how Ravenloft approached handling monsters, where it's like, yeah, here's an entry for a vampire, but every individual vampire can be different. And so don't expect that every vampire is going to be like this one. Not all vampires will be affected by garlic, for example, and some might not be affected by a stake through the heart. For certain vampires, maybe you have to stab them with like a golden spear or something. Like, who knows? It might be related to their backstory or whatever. But I think taking that kind of approach is better, because then it frees the GM up to be flexible and accommodate. Like they like in Pusong Ling, like fox spirits and ghosts are like the two big things that you keep encountering. Female fox spirits and female ghosts. There are some male ghosts and male fox spirits, but it's mainly the female. And there are so many different varieties that you almost end up with. You could end up with like a catalog of like 50 different types of fox spirits just from reading the stories. So I think ultimately what it is what's important is the story, not the, not like there's a list of rules that you have to follow every single time.
Yeah. One thing this movie really, I think, perfectly encapsulates is an issue that we just were talking about in the last meeting we had about this, new content. And you don't necessarily have to get into the mechanical stuff per se, but one issue that we identified is the question of whether or not our game is intended for players to be ordinary people who get sucked into a supernatural and or horror or magical situation, or is it supposed to be that they're expert demon hunters that get called in to clear out the castle of ghosts or whatever it is. And I think the short answer to the question is both, essentially. And I think this movie does it is and there's many other movies, but this one does the perfect, balancing act where it shows some guy who's kind of just an ordinary guy that gets pulled into the magical situation, and then he gets paired up with some top expert guy who knows everything but at the same time is still a little bit outclassed and a little bit unsure of everything that's going on.
Yeah. No, it's one of the things that I like about this movie. It's also something like when I did Strange Tales of Song Ling, that's something I was thinking about a lot. Is you need to be able to have the scholar and you need to be able to have the swordsman, and so I do think that people should be free to make characters that will go in either direction. I think as long as, and that'll be possible because if you make a regular Righteous Blood character, they might not be experts at killing ghosts. You know what I mean? But if you use a lot of the signature abilities and rules that we're going to be adding to the expansion, then your character will be, especially over time. Like the swordsman in this is probably not a level 1 character. He's probably like at least level 5, maybe higher.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But like you could make a character like that. I think that's something that we want to have, is that you can make a guy like this. And again, I think this movie is like a baseline that we need to check ourselves against periodically.
Sure.
But,
and what do you think about the tree demon itself in terms of if you were going to assign a level to that? Because I was thinking about that as I was watching the scene, and I was thinking, man, so you have the girl who is probably, she, like he points out that she has Qinggong and she can kind of do some things. So if you were going to assign a level, I would say maybe she's like 3 or 5 or something. And then the Taoist guy, the swordsman, probably, like you said, 5 or maybe a little bit higher. And then Leslie Chung's character, probably 1 or maybe even a level 0.
I would say 1. I'd say he's level 1. Yeah,
level 1. So, but man, that tree demon is like, does a lot of stuff. And yet, so is it a case of, like, I've thought about this issue in a lot of movies, because, obviously movies are not sitting around with dice calculating everything. But, if it was a statted creature, did they win because of blind chance of circumstance, because everything happened right? And in real life, if you had a creature with stats that was reflective of the way that tree demon worked in the movie, would it be possible for a level 1, a level 3, and a level 5 character to actually defeat something, or was it just complete random luck?
Well, I think it was a movie, and so there's that. And in the game, so number one, I don't think the monsters will necessarily have like levels, so it's a little bit
right.
Like we could, but like if we're just going to give a level just for the purpose of saying what was the power of the, I would say as she's like what, a 1,000-year-old cultivated tree demon, right?
Yeah.
So let's assume that the cap of our game is exceeded if we bring gods and stuff. Like if I bring a god into the game, 9 doesn't matter. That's 18. Do you know what I mean? But a tree demon would be at least 9, I would think.
Yeah.
And I would say Swordsman Yan, he might be. So it's weird because I said 5 at first, but I think in order to reflect what's going on in the movie, he has to be the same level or a level below the tree demon. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
that's maybe 2 levels below at most, because he is getting help and stuff. But like, he was definitely able of dueling with this tree demon on his own to some degree. So
yeah, he knew what was going on, and he like was ready and willing and able to just take it on, head to head.
Yeah.
And then kind of circumstances led to him getting, caught by surprise, this situation, and maybe, things didn't go as expecting the other situation. But it wasn't as though he was like a level 9 character facing up a level 30 character or something.
But what that might also mean is that we might want to consider factoring in killing Aura Darkness there, because he does have all these lines about how good cannot be defeated by evil. The evil, the good will win. And it seems to be part of what, like, because he's sort of early on in the movie, he's compared to the other swordsman who's not as good of a guy. The other swordsman gets seduced by the ghost, like right away. The other swordsman, we see him cutting off people's heads. He's just like a brutal guy. And the Wu Ma character is much more measured and protective of things. And the reason he's retreated from the world is because he doesn't like the corruption in it. So presumably he's a pretty upstanding guy. I think it might be wise to have some monsters where characters with a higher killing aura darkness would have a harder time fighting them than characters with lower killing aura darkness. Do you know what I mean? That might be interesting. But But
I'm writing this down as a note really quickly.
okay, yeah, I think that would be pretty cool because that was something I did pick up on this viewing. But I was like, oh, I think his I think how good of a person he was kind of mattered here. Um, and also he's like a stubborn prick a little bit. You know, he's kind of got like that. He's got this. He's an interesting character. He's one of my favorite characters from these movies, and he's probably the best character Wu Ma's ever played. Like he just is amazing. I don't even know how to describe the character. This is a character who gets away with doing a rap in the middle of the movie, and it doesn't feel like an intrusion on anything. It actually feels like it belongs in the film, right? So,
right. I just think it was funny how the whole thing relating to the sutra was really hilarious. How he basically gave it to him and he said, I can't read this. And he's like, well, just say the first line over and over again. And then later on, they're both saying the first line over and over again to protect themselves.
Yeah, so does that mean he didn't know how to read it himself?
I think that was what the implication was.
Well, and also he was a Taoist and it was a Buddhist sutra, right? And it was in like Sanskrit or something, wasn't it? I forget. Or Bali.
Well, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm kind of starting to mix together I forget which is coming from the short story and which is from the movie, but I think he was said to be some sort of like city magistrate or government official or something, right? Who then gave up his mundane, he got too tired of corruption or something like that, and then decided to become a Taoist. So I think it doesn't really explicitly state this, but I would think there's a little bit of a difference between somebody who had a full life as a government official, then decided to go be a Buddhist, as opposed to like somebody who was raised as a Buddhist and trained as a demon hunter and all. I mean, it doesn't obviously say that in the movie, but in my mind, it would be a little bit different.
No, I think that's true. But also, like, you know, he describes himself as a Taoist, but the scripture is Buddhist. So even if he was educated in Taoist stuff, I figure maybe he doesn't know, you know, Bali canon stuff. You know, like, but I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with the diamond suit. That's what they translated it as, the diamond suit.
It translated as diamond suit, but it's actually not that. It's I'd have to pull it up. It's actually I have it in my phone here. In the Minford translation, I believe, I think he translated it directly and correctly. It's I have it right here in my phone, but it's not pulling up. In any case, it's something different in Chinese. I forget what it was. Oh, here it is. It's the Surangama Sutra, a tantric work by Paramiti in 705, which incidentally, I'm pretty sure they translated I think they translated it as Paramita in the subtitles we were watching. Do you remember they were saying something Paramita?
Yeah, I do remember that.
But Paramita is different. I was gonna comment on this because I thought it was so cool that Paramita came up, but I'm not sure if it's the same thing. The reason I bring this up is because Paramita is something from in Chinese it's Bi'an, which means the other shore. It's a Buddhist concept, but it gets brought up in fantasy novels all the time. And the ones that I translate for anybody out there that's listening, in I Shall Sail the Heavens, there's something called the Resurrection Lily. Well, the Resurrection Lily is really a Paramita flower. I didn't want to translate it Paramita directly when I was doing I Shall Sail the Heavens, so I did it more conceptually based on how the flower was described. Resurrection Lily is actually probably a pretty bad translation now that I think about it. But in any case, Paramita comes up in that novel. It's come up in all of the novels that I've translated. It's also come up it also is mentioned in the short story version of the Chinese ghost story. Mm-hmm. She says something along the lines. What she says is, and I don't want to get too deep into the translation topic because John Minford is like a very well respected and educated translator, but I sometimes really don't understand why he translates things the way he translates them. In the short story, the girl who in Chinese is Nie Xiaoqian, she says, I have fallen into the sea of suffering and I cannot reach the other shore, and the other shore is Paramita. Mm-hmm. So now again, I'm not a Buddhist and I don't claim to be like some Buddhist scholar, but it's come up so often in the novels and stories that I've read that I do know that a general concept from Buddhism is that you cross the sea of suffering to the other shore, and that's reaching perfection, and that's Bi'an or Paramita. And so in the story, she says that. She says, I have fallen into this sea of suffering and I cannot reach the other shore because she's a ghost and she can't be reincarnated. The English translation from Minford's, she just goes, "I have fallen into a deep sea and cannot reach the other shore," which kind of is technically accurate, but it kind of simplifies it.
Here's been my assumption for why that is. I'd have to look at the Chinese classics version to see how they translated it, because I haven't read that version in about a year, so I don't remember. I can't compare them very easily right now. But my sense is anytime it would be required to have a footnote to explain it, that's when he often opts for those kinds of Americans won't understand it, so I'm just going to do it this way type of thing.
I think that's actually what really annoys me the most about translations like that, is that they translate to the lowest common denominator, and they kind of just they assume that the readers just won't get it, and so they're whatever, it doesn't matter, we'll translate it this other way. That philosophy of translation kind of annoys me. But in any case, going back to the point is, and you can find the Surangama Sutra on Amazon, so I'm assuming there's other places that you could probably find it for free online. It says it's by Master Paramiti of Central North India. So I don't really know if the Paramiti, this Master Paramiti, is that the same or related to Paramita, or is it different? I don't really know. But how did I get onto that?
You were talking about, you said Paramita came up. And
right, because you said Diamond Sutra. You asked if it was the Diamond Sutra, and I was just saying that I had looked a little bit more deeply into it, and I'm not sure what the Diamond Sutra is, but I'm fairly certain that's a real life and common sutra.
Yeah, that's why I think they chose that. But yeah, and again, I don't, my wife's Buddhist, but I'm not Buddhist, so I don't know enough about this stuff. I've read a bit on it, but I don't want to I don't want to say anything that will get her mad at me or be wrong. So but my I think that stuff's interesting, because that like the stuff that you're describing, it gives the story greater meaning. That's why it's significant. Do you know if the Minford translation, he does have footnotes? Does he talk about that in the footnotes? Do you know, or no? I'd be interested to see if he does. For me, if the translation is being done because he wants the prose to be beautiful, but then in the footnote it's explained to me, I'm usually okay with it, because then I can see from the footnote what the deal is, and I can have both. I can have like the insight but the flow of the language. But it's when it's just the flow of the language and there's no explanation, and then I'm sort of left as a reader with half of a concept. Do you know what I mean? Then that's when I find that I get frustrated. I do like the Minford translation just in terms of how it reads. I've always thought it was very engaging.
I mean, his prose is great, and whether it's this or whether it's his other major translation that I read is Deer in the Cauldron, which I read before I knew anything about Chinese, and so I thought it was amazing. On the English side, it's great. It's, looking at it, just skimming through it, I don't see any footnote on it, and he has a...
Oh, no, they're not. So the footnotes in this book are tricky, because there's not actual numbers in the text, but if you go to the back of the book, most of the stories have footnotes in them that are unmarked, if that makes sense.
Oh.
So so you talk, and I'll actually look this story up in the
okay. I mean, I like I was saying, in terms of the English result or the final version of the translation, it reads really, really good. I being an unlettered man, so to speak, I'm not a university lecturer. I don't have any certifications in translation and whatnot. So perhaps I don't have much, freedom of speech, I guess. I don't have the right to be criticizing, one of the world's most foremost Chinese translators, I guess. Having said that, I'm going to go ahead and criticize him. But basically, I get the whole footnote thing. Because the footnote thing is something that translators talk about all the time, and it's something you can't avoid with Chinese, because there's so much that just is culturally incomprehensible to people who aren't familiar with Chinese culture. But for instance, in that specific instance where what she says is, I have fallen into the sea of suffering and I can't reach Paramita, I think the resulting translation, you let me know if there's a footnote clarifying.
I'm looking right now. I'm at the footnotes. But
it basically, the translation, which I'd have to pull it up, I'm fairly confident it said something along the lines of, I have fallen into a deep sea and I cannot reach the other shore. It just, or something along those lines. The way it's translated makes it come across as though she is simply saying some kind of like she's just talking, making a random metaphor, like. But it's a lot more.
No,
than that.
I would agree with you. I mean, that definitely at least needs a footnote, in my opinion. But I don't see a footnote on that. Interestingly enough, there is one on the Surangama Sutra.
Really?
Yeah. So you might have been pleased by that, but I
noticed that he translated it. He translated it correctly in that, so that was cool. Like for me personally, if I was gonna be translating something and I wanted it to make it clear to the reader that it wasn't just her making a random metaphor, like, oh, the sun is hot, so I went under a tree, but in reality it's based on something deeper. Yeah. I would have considered at least, maybe putting something in capitals, like I've fallen into the sea of bitterness capital, and then I have not been able to reach the other shore capitalized. You would still get the metaphor, but at the same time would be like, oh, there's probably more to this. That's not just a swimming metaphor. It's deeper than that. But again, that's just.
And it could have also been like a can of worms situation where he was thinking to himself, if I get into this, I'm going to be unwrapping a lot of cosmology that I now have to explain. But one thing that I think, I don't know, with things like, I think I do like to see better explanations of cosmological stuff like that, because when you're a reader coming at something from outside the culture, it's just really helpful to get some footholds on like why the reincarnation thing is important and how it works and all, and most of that I was able to intuit from prior knowledge, but like you said, there's that specific reference which was sort of a meaningful reference that gets glossed over. So
I mean, probably talking about this is in itself a can of worms, because I could go on and on. Like, I'll give one more example of things that I don't particularly like about this translation, is the fact that he translates the name, and this is an issue that I've done videos about and translators talk about all the time, and there's different schools of thought about it and whatnot, but he makes it sound like, so in the English translation, he has her say, my surname is Nia, and people have taken to calling me Little Beauty. That is just wrong. It does not, it makes it sound like Little Beauty is her nickname. In Chinese, she literally just says, my surname is Nia and my name is Xiao Qian. That's just her name. Little Beauty is, and he does this. He likes to do this. He did it not Condor Heroes, Deer in the Cauldron as well, where he gave the characters nicknames. Like, for example, the main character of Deer in the Cauldron is Wei Xiaobao, and he decided to call Xiaobao Trinket because it's a translation. But it's really weird, because that's not how names work in Chinese. Yes, names in Chinese do all have, generally speaking, the characters that make up a name do have a meaning. That's true. But when Chinese people talk to each other, they're not thinking about that name the way that they would think of a Jianghu nickname. Like, if I named, like, my Jianghu nickname was like, like Hey Yuan or something, like Black Cloud, and I told people, oh, my nickname is Black Cloud, then when you call that person Black Cloud, it's the same as in Chinese as in English, where you're kind of in the back of your mind, you're thinking, oh, this is Black Cloud. So like, my wife's name is Yuan Yuan, and the first Yuan is basically a character that means beautiful, I guess, to simplify it. And then the other one is the most common character, yuan, which has a lot of different meanings, but it's the name of the currency in China. So let's say it means money. Like, when people say yuan yuan, they don't think like, oh, there's beautiful money. Like, it's just not like that. Not anymore. That, when I say Jet Li, do you think about like a jet airplane? Like, I mean, you could make a joke about that, and you could say that, but when you're just walking, when I just go up to you like, hey, have you seen the latest Jet Li movie? You're not thinking, have I seen the movie by the guy that has an airplane in his name? Like, I don't know. So yeah, I could rant about that for a long time.
No, I get that, but I will say about the Jet Li thing, if I stop and think about it, I'm like, oh, is the jet there because he's so fat? Like, true, yeah. So, but that might be just that example, but like,
well, he picked that name as a a stage name, but like, if you had your friend and they named their kid Jet, well, I guess then maybe you'd be like, hey, did you name him after Jet Li? And then you're thinking, where did Jet Li get his name?
Well, I guess
there's a lot of names in English that are also nouns, like Stone or something like that, where a kid named Stone, Stone Johnson, you're not thinking.
I have a nephew named Hunter. Do you know what I mean? And so like, you know,
Right,
Hunter.
yeah.
But then at the same time, like when I do use that name, I do so like it conjures up the idea of hunting. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
So like, I don't
That's
know.
one thing about
That
not translating the names. I get it. Like when you don't translate the names, you lose the feeling of it, and there is a feeling of it. And another downside to not translating the names is that when Chinese readers are reading, they're constantly being met with the characters that make up the name, so they never forget the meaning of it. And in English, when you transliterate the name and then just put a footnote to explain it, most of the readers are going to forget the meaning pretty quickly. But that said, you know, again, I don't want to translate to the lowest common denominator. Give readers more credit than give readers credit. And I'll give you an example, which is the main character of one of the novels I wrote. No, sorry, not novels I wrote. Novels I translated. His name is Bai Xiaochun, and that's a very meaningful name because Bai means white, Xiao means little or small, Chun means pure. It's a very kind of cute and distinctive name. Well, guess what? It goes completely contrary to his personality because he's a mischievous and very cowardly and underhanded kind of scoundrel character. So later on, what happened is the readers of the novel, they switched every single character in his name. So instead of Bai, they called him Hei, which is black. Instead of Xiao, they call him Da, which means big. Instead of Xiao, which means small. And instead of Chun, they called him Wu, which means impure, basically, or dirty. So they changed. The readers in Chinese in the comment section of the novel started calling him Hei Da Wu, which is the opposite of his real name. It's a really funny, like clever thing. In fact, it was so clever that the author eventually had some characters in the novel call him that as well. So it was really funny. So I put that information into a footnote of the translation, and I told the readers, I said, hey, just so you know, Hei Da Wu is the opposite of his real name, and I explained it. And then I said, everybody who really likes this novel and is really cool, you can start referring to the character by this and remember what it means. And you know, the people who aren't really big fans are going to always wonder what you're talking about. And that's exactly what happened. Was the readers really liked it. They started using Hei Da Wu in the comments to talk about the character, and then several hundred chapters later, a lot of other readers were starting to say, who is this Hei Da Wu character? Well, you've never seen him in the novel. So the point is the readers can remember the meanings of the character's name if it's relevant, I think.
Yeah, and I know nothing about translation, so I really can't. All I can say is, as a reader, what I like to get, I don't really have a preference. I sort of take it case by case, but I don't like the ones that really annoy me are like when they translate kung fu as like karate when they're talking about kung fu. I mean, like those kind of ones really bother me. Like when they called Huang Rong Lotus Huang, that didn't really bother me so much because I knew who it was. My only irritation was that name seemed so well known that it was like, that's gonna confuse people now. Do you know what I mean? Like that was but as a reader, I was like, you know, Lotus Huang's pretty easy to remember. I'm not so, you know, that's not so bad. But I like getting an explanation. I feel like if you're gonna call the character Lotus Huang, you have to explain at the beginning of the book, at the very least, this character is known as this, and this is, you're most likely going to see this name, and that's why, you know. I feel like explanations are important. I feel like sometimes you're not even afforded the explanation, and then that's what tends to tick me off. But yeah, so I don't know. But we've gotten pretty deep into the translating stuff.
Sorry.
So no, that's fine.
I could go on and on.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably clear from the context of the conversation. But this is what Jeremy does. He translates professionally. So it's a subject he knows way better than I do.
So swinging back around to the movie, it's definitely a recommend, and this is going to be our jumping off point. In terms of inspiration for the magical and supernatural stuff that we're gonna hopefully be adding to Righteous Blood, Ruthless Blades.
Yeah, and let me just say, so people are like, provided they've been listening this whole time, because we're running like an hour mark now. That we don't know exactly what shape this is gonna take. We don't, you know, most likely me and Jeremy are gonna. Well, we don't know how it's gonna get published yet. We don't know like what platform this will be published on and all that stuff, but and so a lot of what that means is on the one hand there's a lot of unknowns, but on the other hand we seems like we have a lot more freedom to determine what's the general scope of this going to be. And so if we want to just make this a small, initial dip into an expansion for Righteous Blood, it could be that. If we need more room, we can probably do that. And we're sort of just hashing that out as we go. So this is a very fluid, adaptive situation. But our aim is to provide something supernatural for Righteous Blood Ruthless Blades, because people have been asking for that, and we've kind of long known that that's going to be something that the game will probably need to do in some way. And this is the first movie, and I think in the coming months we'll be going over other movies. I already kind of know what I think the next film should be, but I'm going to talk with Jeremy about that to see what his feeling is, and we can, we'll settle on a film. Obviously availability is going to be an issue too, because some of the better movies are just simply not available in formats where both of us would be able to watch them. So I don't know, anything else to add about the movie. I don't know, I feel like we've talked a lot about everything.
Yeah, I think that covers it pretty well. It is available for the time being free if you have Amazon Prime, so you can go ahead and check that out. And the subtitles are, even though they might not be the best, they're pretty good. And make sure to follow me on social media, or subscribe to my newsletter or whatever it is, to keep in touch as we go along with this project. What Brennan was getting at but didn't directly say is Osprey, the original publisher of Righteous Blood Ruthless Blades, is not going to be publishing this, but they gave us the go ahead to do whatever we wanted. I guess their release schedule is backed up for years in terms of the release.
If we did this through them, it would come out, so it would be 3 years from now, and it wouldn't be. It just didn't make any sense based on what they were saying. But I think at least that was my understanding. I could be wrong, but yeah. So we'll be in, and again, it might. We don't know what that means in terms of what it's going to look like and all this, but I think. But we'll still be following probably a lot of the same formats and stuff. So, but yeah, the movie, like Jeremy said, it's I recommend the Blu-ray if you want the clarity of the image. I recommend the DVD if you want the witty subtitles. I thought the subtitles on I don't have it in front of me right now, but the DVD that I have that I like is it's got a red cover. It's quite, it's got a very striking, nice sort of cover with, I think like all the cast members in costume on the front. The Blu-ray is good too. It's just the subtitles I feel are a little underwhelming if you've seen the DVD before that. So I guess we'll head out, and until next time, we will talk to you later.
With the laughter comes the rain, with my anger comes a tide of emotion, killing joy, cutting steel across your eyes. Are you dead or insane as you start